A time when conditions are right for the accomplishment of a crucial action. The opportune and decisive moment. That's the working definition of Kairos. And today I'm going to be talking with the founder of the Kairos Network. Matt Peeples is in the pastor's office today, and we're going to talk about the Missionary Pathway, the Kairos Network, and how you can reflect God's light and love simply by telling someone else about Jesus on today's episode of the Reflection Podcast. In the pastor's office with me is Matt Peeples. Thanks for joining me again, Matt.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always fun to get to hang out with you.
So we talked a few years ago, actually. I believe it was in the first or second season of the podcast, and you had just moved to St. Louis. You were there
Yep.
for about a year, the St. Louis area. So, and you just started out of Kairos. You started the
Mhm.
Missionary Pathway. So, I'd like you to kind of give us the backstory on the Missionary Pathway and how that all came about.
Yeah, so the Missionary Pathway, I did a lot of training of church planters and did that when I was in planting a church in Knoxville, Tennessee. We did that for several years and then went up to New Jersey. And as we were taking over an existing church, we were also training church planters. But when I was in the Northeast, I was really struck living in a post-Christian context of just we are leaving our greatest asset untapped. And that's the average everyday Christian who is going out to places and spaces we can't go. And I realize now I'd spent a lot of time training church planters where you're pouring a lot of time and energy and finances into training somebody who's going to hopefully plant a church, right? And we're missing out on the people that have that call on their life to go as they're going, make disciples. And so, what would it look like to train average everyday Christians with the same intentionality that you train a church planter? And so, Trey, who was at the church plant in Tennessee and then planted in Houston, really wanted to jump on board with this idea too. And so, we got together and created a training that was designed to train average everyday Christians, ministry leaders too, how to share the gospel where they're already going, and used a transformational learning style. So, something that basically, if you think of the academic model, you've got the 70-20-10, 70% book learning, 20% mentorship, 10% do. And so, a transformational learning style just like flips that on its head. And so, 10% of it's book learning, we do it through a platform. And then the other 20% is cohort in a very discipling style. And then the rest of the 70% is just putting it into practice where you're already going. I like to tell people when you're doing the missionary pathway, we're not asking you to add anything to your schedule. We're asking you to be more intentional where you're already going. And so that was really the goal with it. And that was the idea kicking it off. And we kicked off our first cohort September 2022. Yeah, September 2022 with 18 people. Three dropped out. So we were down to 15. And it was amazing because by of December of 23, we had 350 in 8 countries that had signed up. By January of 24, it was 450 in 12 countries. By like a few months later, it was 550. Now it's over 1,000 that have signed up. And what we've noticed is as you're teaching people how to be missional where they're already going and how to make disciples, they turn around and then teach other people how to do that. And when the platform is built on a free platform like the Missionary Pathway is, you don't have to sit there and go, okay, how much is it going to cost me to train somebody? You walk them through the same process that you've been through. And so because of that, we started noticing the missionary pathway was a flywheel. So even though more and more people were engaging with it and starting to utilize it, it wasn't taking us more and more time and attention to see that happen. It was just average everyday Christians who were going on mission and then teaching other people how to go on mission.
I'm not hearing the word evangelism, but
You
but
know
that's
what?
what that's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and this is the funny thing. I think this experience for me, it's really reshaped the way I think about ministry. and mission. And one of the biggest things I've learned over the last several years is all evangelism is discipleship. Not all discipleship is evangelism. And I think we think of them as these two radically distinct things, when in reality, evangelism is just discipling somebody that has not yet come to faith in Jesus.
Excellent. I'm really interested in that concept too, because evangelism has, I don't know, it leaves a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths,
Mm.
especially established Christians. I can't
Oh,
possibly,
yeah.
make it be an evangelist, but they can be someone who will just share their faith. And that sounds like what that is.
Yeah, and I think a part of it is evangelism. Oftentimes, when people are doing evangelism, they're learning like very specific methods to do it. And those methods tend to work well in a time and a place. But then what happens is people just get so used to using those methods that when the methods have kind of moved beyond their usefulness, not that the gospel's not useful or sharing the gospel is not useful, but the tactic in which people use to share it is kind of no longer culturally relevant. People still get stuck in those ways. And I think that can oftentimes really taint people toward evangelism. And also, a lot of times when we talk about evangelism, people think we talk about doing something with people that we have no relationship with. And we're trying to kind of meet people cold. And I think that's where really kind of reclaiming that in the discipleship space is important because, Jesus told us, as you are going, make disciples. And so he was expecting us to share Jesus, to make disciples with people that we were already encountering in our everyday life, already at some level had a relationship with, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, because 30 years ago, when I was being trained to do this pastor thing, we did dialogue evangelism and we did cold call
Yes.
evangelism. And I think ever since 2020, that doesn't happen anymore.
No,
You just don't go and knock on people's doors anymore. It's just
no.
not done. But we do have, and it's interesting because social media obviously is a huge thing.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, you're talking to people you have no relationship with, yes, but you do. You,
Yeah.
you have a social
Yeah.
media connection. So you already have some kind of relationship with them. And that's excellent. So how's it going? You're talking about different countries that you've got
Yeah.
these people in. How's that going? And what's been the results that you've seen?
It's been going really well. What I've noticed is when people really walk through the process and then they catch it, some people just take off. And they will start training other people to do it. They'll start getting more missional in their community. We've got one of the stories I love telling is when I came here to faith, I was just started attending as a member because we were doing the Kairos Network full time. And so I was attending here at this church as a member, and we started hosting some Missionary Pathway. And so we had a group of lay people that were walking through it. And one of them was a woman named Karen. And the time we were doing it didn't work out for her. And I said, well, Karen, that's okay. We've got cohorts going with people around the country. Why don't you jump in on one of those? So she jumps on a cohort, but she 71-year-old retired Karen jumps in on a cohort with the first district president we've ever had walk through Missionary Pathway and a bunch of pastors and church planters. And let me tell you something, she was the spark of the group. She entered that group just wanting to learn how to make her cookie business more missional. And all of a sudden, she starts getting engaged in a mission opportunity in the St. Louis area that you would have never expected. Restoration House working with homeless teens and 20 somethings, and just learning how to share her faith in that space in a way that is relational, but not like forceful, not forcing her faith on people. She would start talking to anybody about faith and knew how, felt like she had the confidence to strike up a conversation and know when it was the right time to talk about faith in Jesus and know when it was just the right time to have a conversation and feel okay doing either. And the other cool thing was she took a group of 11 retired women at faith. And she was so impacted by it. She takes a group of 11 retired women and starts walking them through Missionary Pathway. So she's kind of one of these examples of, just one example of an average everyday Christian who kind of grabbed a hold of these concepts and started putting them into practice where she was already going and making steps that she just hadn't made before. Another example that sticks out is we were doing this with the Iowa West District, and one of the churches, Gloria Day, had a few staff members that did it. And those staff members started doing it at Gloria Day. And all of a sudden, within a year, they had I think close to like 80 some people, and they already saw third generation leaders that had been raised up through doing Missionary Pathway and were now taking it to other churches. Uh, and so the cool thing with discipleship is what I've learned about discipleship, and the thing that was so counterintuitive to me is through this process, I've learned that discipleship is small and slow at first. And because it's small and slow, we in our American mindset kind of tend to dismiss it. We're like, bigger is better, faster is better. But when it comes to discipleship, you even read through the scriptures, and Jesus talks about this all the time about the kingdom of God being like a mustard seed. And what I've learned is that slow and small becomes big and fast before you realize it. And so I think the challenge for me was learning the value of just pouring into a few people deeply, teaching them how to do discipleship in a way that was simple, because simple is highly reproducible. And I think the other reason we oftentimes don't see things multiply like that in the Western church is everything we like to do is so complex. You know, like putting on a worship service to gather people in. There's a lot of moving parts in that, and a lot of volunteers it takes, and a lot of training it takes. And when people, that's not a bad way to disciple people. I think it's a good and important way to disciple people. But if it's the only method people know for discipling, they kind of look at that and they go, that was very edifying for me, but I can't do what Pastor Ed does. Like, I can't do what Pastor Matt does. Versus what I learned is in this discipling model that we utilize with Missionary Pathway and doing things like discovery Bible study and teaching people how to have spiritual conversations and how to listen to the Holy Spirit. What I've realized is people are like, "Oh, that's really simple. I could probably do that with my neighbor or my coworker or my friend down the street." And that's really the aspect that causes it to take off. Is it simple? And simple is highly reproducible.
So you've talked about lay people, Karen, 71-year-old cookie maker, uh,
Yeah.
and also a district president, a pastor of pastors. So is this for pastors, this for lay people, is this for both?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's for both. What it is it teaches you how to go out and share the gospel in a discipling way, and it uses why principles to do it. So what I've noticed is you've got Karen who was doing that with a bunch of retired women. And then on the flip end of that, at the same time Karen was walking through it, we had a vicar who was in North Carolina who was walking a group of 30 some people from his church through it, and then made a huge impact in that church. Started changing the way they were doing their or their visioning process, which was really cool. But also, he started seeing second generation stories of like he had a group from that church that started getting together and then finding a place to go out and do mission, and they started serving with homeless vets. And as they started serving with those homeless vets started coming out with them to church and started getting connected in the community of church. And then one time, there was this homeless vet who was going to lose his housing because he was in a program to kind of get some. And one of the guys who at first Daniel tells me was kind of pushed against that missionary pathway process, it really ended up buying into it. He just sat there and realized, well, I have a house. Why doesn't he just stay with me? And so you've got mission happening. Well, come to find out, that homeless vet used to sleep on the campus of the church. But because they had a school, they couldn't allow people to just sleep on the campus. And so, what you started seeing was here's this person that in that traditional model of church wasn't easily going to be able to find a place. But because people were being trained how to make disciples and lay people were starting to take ownership of that where they were already going, they were able to care for somebody in a way that the church as a whole wasn't easily able to do that. And so you start seeing stories like that. And then Daniel ended up taking that same process and he started leading young adults and college age students through it. So the amazing thing is, at the same time Karen's leading 11 retired women through it, Daniel is leading a cohort of college students through it. And on the surface, you would think they would need radically different things. But because the training's built on why principles, kind of first article principles, things that are true beyond culture and context, then what they're doing is they're kind of learning tools that then get applied in their context in very contextual ways. And so while they're doing the same training, the conversations that Karen's having with the retired women look radically different than the conversation Daniel's having with the college age students. And the way the retired women are engaging with the community looks radically different than the way the college students are, even though they're walking through that same process. And so, with that in mind, that's how you're able to kind of have a training that like works well for the average everyday Christian, the layperson, or the ministry leader.
You mentioned why principles. What is that? What's the why principle in
Yeah.
Pathway?
So why principles? We steal that language from Simon Sinek. He had this really great TED talk called "Start with Why." And in the TED talk, he talks about everything has a how, a what, and a why. And he says everybody usually knows the how or usually knows the what. A few people know the how, but if you know the why, the how and the what become common sense. And so the example I always like using with people on that is the Starbucks example, which is like everybody knows Starbucks is a coffee shop. Like you walk in, you see coffee, it's not hard to put two and two together. A few people know how that works. So the people that work behind the counter know when they brew certain coffees and know how they do their processes. But if you understand the why of that coffee shop, everything else they do just makes sense. And so one time I had this opportunity to read Howard Schultz's book, the founder of Starbucks. And when he started Starbucks, he wanted to create the European coffee experience, like a third space where community could gather together and have a good cup of coffee. And so all of a sudden, when you realize that, you everything about what Starbucks does just starts to make sense. It's like, well, that's why they have power chargers so often just put into the booths. That's why they don't kick anybody out of Starbucks for sitting too long. They don't have Wi-Fi limits. They want you to gather there. They want it to be, they always have some kind of community table somewhere where people could sit down together. And the reason they do that is because that's what they're trying to create. Now you compare that to another coffee shop like a Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah, Dunkin' Donuts is making coffee, but Dunkin' Donuts wants to make coffee that you can grab on the go, you know? So Dunkin' Donuts doesn't put a bunch of tables in there. They would never want you in there just, doing your work for the day. Everything about it is super fast and efficient. And the reason for that is because even though they're both coffee shops, they have radically different whys.
Mhm.
And so those why principles are things that you can take out. We would in the church world call them first article principles. They're things that are just true to how you've been created. And so what we do is we don't say, okay, what does mission look like in New Jersey or St. Louis, Missouri? Or we say, okay, what is true about disciple making? And what is true about people and having spiritual conversations? And so we take those pieces and we train people in those tools. And then they take those tools and they utilize those tools to do mission and ministry in the context in which God has placed them.
So incredibly radical, but also incredibly different or simple. I meant
Yeah.
it's basically how Jesus operated 2,000
Right.
years ago, and it's still so relevant 2,000 years later. You mentioned church planting with Trey starting a church down in Texas.
Yeah.
I want to drill down on a little bit. So it's sort of a little off ramp here from missionary pathway, but to
Yeah.
church planting itself. Uh, Talk about the challenges of church planting
Mm.
versus the established church.
Yeah, there's advantages. There's definitely advantages that you have church planning, and there's different challenges that you have. One of the interesting things, and I'd love to say that this was on purpose, this was 100% accidental. Um, when we created the missionary pathway, we ended up answering one of the big challenges in church planting. Now, one of the big challenges in church planting is usually you have a key individual, sometimes like the planting pastor or maybe one or two people that have been trained in doing mission in a community and contextualizing ministry. And then everybody else in the church plant context only knows how to think past church experience. And so one of the big challenges in church planting is you're trying to reach the community around you. You're trying to do that in a way that is faithful to the scriptural narrative, faithful to word and sacrament ministry, but at the same time is contextually relevant. And so it's kind of a science and an art, if you will. And so when you're doing that, oftentimes one of the big challenges you have is the people that are coming along helping to make this happen. They only know how to think about their past experience at whatever church they were at before. And so oftentimes, like, well, we never did it that way. So then you've got a church planner that's having to explain why they're doing it the way they're doing it so that the people can catch up and then actually be a part of, pouring in. And so with Missionary Pathway, what we realized is, well, everybody's learning how to think missionally, contextually. Everybody knows how to make a disciple now. And so everybody is able to kind of move forward together in that church planting process. One of the advantages of church planting is you're starting a church for that time and place. And so most of what you're doing fits into that culture a lot more easily than if you're at an established church and you have kind of generations of history and you're kind of like always kind of having to either reinvent or change some things, or you start to get to a point where you've just always done things a certain way and people kind of forget why you do it that way. And so that's one of the unique things in church planting is you're getting to create this thing from the ground up. But one of the challenges with that is sometimes it's the other churches around that don't have that kingdom mentality. And I think one of the big things when you're church planting is trying to help connect with people that have a kingdom mentality and not just a my kingdom mentality. Because if people think about church as a place for Christians, well, then they see the church plan as competitive. It's like, well, if people start going to your church, they won't be coming to my church. And now you're talking about starting a Lutheran church, but there's another Lutheran church right here, you know? And so I think one of the biggest challenges is helping people focus on the lost and the lost as a key driver for launching new churches. Because if you focus on the lost, what you realize is there's an abundance of people out there that need Jesus more than any church in our community could reach in whole. And so we kind of need each other in that kingdom mentality. One of the advantages of a church plant is you're new, so you're able to like create new things, make new things, and kind of pivot really quickly and easily. That's also one of the challenges of planting is you don't have a lot of resources. On your best day, you feel college broke, It's kind of like, you hit this point where you're like an adult, but you're still very dependent on people helping support what's going on. And what can tend to happen in a church plant is church plants can tend to gather a lot of new Christians, which is great. But as several pastors have said in the past, usually the last thing to get saved is somebody's wallet.
Hmm.
And so you always feel like you're growing faster than your finances are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But two, that can be an advantage because sometimes what you have to do is you just have to say, well, okay, sure, if we had X number of dollars, we could do it this way, but what would it look like if we're still supposed to do this and we don't have that resource? What's another way we could do it? And so innovation tends to be really high in a church plant, which is a really neat thing.
So, is the missionary pathway for church planting, or can it be utilized in a church like this church I serve? It's been around since 1863. We've got a little bit of history here.
This is the fun answer. The answer is yes. Uh, and so the reason is obviously like and I think Mike Breen really said it well. He said, if you plant churches, you might make disciples. If you make disciples, you will plant churches. He said something to that effect. And I think it's so true. I think when it comes to church planting, I wish I had known more about disciple making in this way before I had started in church planting Because if you start discipling people, the church will follow because the church is just a gathering of disciples. With that in mind, where it becomes really helpful in an existing church, and one of the reasons we have a lot of success working with existing churches like yours is because you don't have to change anything about how you do ministry to start discipling people in this way. You don't have to change the organizational structure. You don't have to change the governance and bylaws. You don't have to change the worship style. You don't have to change what community you're in. And the reason is because the way we talk about making disciples, it's about equipping the average everyday Christians coming out and then equipping them where they're going. So that moves beyond things like worship style and governance. And then the other thing that's been very helpful about Missionary Pathway with existing churches is when we work with existing churches and existing church leaders, we really take some time to say, okay, so what does it look like for you to integrate some more of these disciple making principles without upsetting the 80% of the church that are being fed by how ministry is being done and have been served well by it and are getting to know Jesus through it. And so what we'll do is we'll teach those church leaders about things like look for the 20%, because there's usually about 20% that want to try something new, that it's okay to keep doing what you're currently doing. Like no disciple making system is perfect, right? We're called to plant and water, and God's the one that chooses what growth he wants to give and where he wants to give it. And so that's where I think the missionary pathway is really helpful. It gives church leaders tangible tools because I think what a lot of times people in existing churches don't realize is Lifeway did some research and they found out 7 out of 10 Christians have never been taught any method to share their faith.
Hmm.
So like when you're giving that really great commission, you know, a sermon, and you're looking out and you're like, I think they get it this time. They get it. They're just going, okay, now how do I do it?
Yeah.
And one of the other challenges Lifeway figured out is that those same 7 out of 10 that are going, we've never been taught any method. Well, 7 out of 10 are expecting that they're going to learn that method from their church and from their local pastor. And one of the challenges we've realized is, if you pull away the pulpit and the Bible study class, there's a lot of our existing ministry leaders that are like, I don't think I know how to share the gospel outside of those two things. And so, what's been really helpful with the missionary pathway is it not only gives a tangible tool and a pathway people can walk through to learn how to do disciple making that they could then turn around and use with other people in their church. And because they could turn around and use it themselves, they're not worried about the budget implications because it's, built on a free platform. It also gives the ministry leader an opportunity to walk through that and a tool that they can use. So oftentimes it's been really neat when we've got a ministry leader and then a few of their leaders walking through it together, and they're getting to do this experience at the same time, and they're learning those practices and principles together. And then they're able to turn around and make adjustments in certain areas. Like we've had people that have simply just started leading discovery Bible studies at the beginning of all their meetings, and that's really helped them learn how to make some more disciples in the existing things. But also, it really helps them realize, hey, I can do this. Like I've got the tools to equip my people. And because we did it on transformational learning style, the biggest thing somebody's putting into their schedule is just that cohort meeting. So they're not having to reteach all these principles to people. The people are learning the principles before they come in. And then in the cohort, you're helping them figure out how to apply them and helping them really dig down in it. Yeah.
So I was trying to find a way to ask this question. I wanted to make it
Yeah.
more personal with you, because the podcast is about reflecting God's light and love. You
Yeah.
personally, you're teaching people how to do this, but I guess the drilling down onto the question was why you? Why are you doing this? So, and how do you reflect God's light and love through all of this?
Yeah. I think for me, I grew up, I grew up going to public school, um, playing sports. So I've always had a lot of friends that were in and out of the church. And I've always had a passion for people that were disconnected from Jesus. And then when I got to church plant, I really fell in love with the freedom you have to do ministry in a way that helps people outside the church connect with the church. And so as I stepped into a more established church role, and I realized that not everybody gets that opportunity to do that. And as I watched as kind of church wrestled with, we made tons of friends up and down the street when we were in New Jersey that were disconnected from church. And we were their one connection to church and Jesus. And like when I saw that and I realized, hey, there's a lot of people in our church that are like that, that have those same communities. It was like, why wouldn't we want to spend time doing that? And so for my wife and I, when we stepped out to do the network, it was kind of one of those moments of like, we need to be ready to just kind of put our yes on the table. I think at one point we had heard this really great sermon from Louis Giglio when we were in the midst of processing, are we supposed to do this? And Louis Giglio had this sermon. I think we just found it last night because she was remembering it, called God's on the Mic. And I think it was back in 20, it must have been like 2021 or January 22, something like that. And he's just kind of talking about how you got to put God's yes on the mic, or put God's yes on the table. Your yes on the table for God. That's how he put it. He did it much better than I did. And we just kind of had this moment where it's like, yeah, the network's not a full-time paying job yet, but my wife had just started working again. And it was like, I think we just need to step into this role full time and see what God does with it. So my wife had started working, so she was able to carry our insurance benefits and stuff. And I just went down to zero salary at that point. And we said, hey, let's launch this out and let's see what God does. And let's just start training people. And it really built up from there. But for me, it was a lot of that. The thing that really helped us make that risky leap was just that, the knowledge of knowing what could it look like if we were able to just help more people learn how to connect disconnected people to Jesus, and see more churches planted that could help people do that.
We went to the same seminary, so I think we took a lot of the same courses, and I don't remember ever learning about this at seminary. So how did you learn about it? Where did you learn
I
all this? So
so yeah.
part of the question of the resources that you would recommend for other people.
Yeah. Gal, a lot of it came out of the church planting world. Um, and a lot of that was because when I stepped into church planting, it's like, okay, there you got to figure this thing out because you got 3 years of support. And so some of that was really helpful. When it came to the discipleship stuff, we've got some stuff for free on our site. Like we have a training called As You Are Going, which is free, and then actually has a journal that comes with it. I don't have one literally right next to me, but we created a couple journals. One's a starting point journal that you can get online. And this is for people that are newer to faith, learning about the gospel. Another one is just a discovery Bible study journal that teaches people how to do discovery Bible study. And you can grab these on Amazon, and it's just got basics on how to do discovery Bible study and then a lot of journal pages to help people kind of journal that out. And the same with As You Are Going. We also created a mission, we call it mindset shifts, or mission mindset shifts. It's also a free training on our website that just has a couple of those critical shifts. When it comes to other people's books that have been really helpful, um, yeah, there's so many. It's hard to start narrowing it down. Um, I think, you know, Keller's got some great stuff if you want to learn how to contextualize in a culture. Um, so understanding the gospel better. Uh, Hugh Halter has written some really good stuff. Tangible Kingdom is one. He had a book called And, where he talked about what this hybrid style mission can look like, the gathered and scattered church. I'm trying to think of more recently. I've got a bunch of them on my desk. Mike Breen has written some really great stuff around what it looks like to share the gospel. And then there's some guys in the Tampa Underground. Brian Sanders has written some really good stuff. He's got one on micro churches that was really good. And then another one, I'm trying to remember the name of that one. But there was a lot of just studying in on discipleship. Another really great book when it comes to disciple making is Daniel Eam. He has a book. He has a book called shoot. He's got two. He just released one recently that is absolutely incredible. I'm gonna pull up my Amazon here just
Mhm.
so I can tell you because I've got them on my Kindle. You can edit me out later. I
No,
apologize.
no problem. I'll add it in. Actually, what I'm going to do is put the links in.
Um,
So,
yeah, so Daniel Eam has written some great books. One of them is No Silver Bullets.
mhm,
What I loved about No Silver Bullets is he talks about disciple making and he utilizes that idea of lead and lag measures. And so, like, a lag measure is not something that you can control, right? It's like church attendance. You know what it is once it's happened. Lead metrics are things that you can control. Like, I can't control how many people show up to church, but I could control how many people I invite out to church in a week, or how many mailers I sent out, or all that kind of stuff. And so he applies that same concept to disciple making. And Lifeway had done a bunch of research on essentially, different metrics of mature disciples. And he said, "Hey, you guys did all this research on this. Do you have the research of what people did that had matured in that way?" And so he found those things. And so while he can't pinpoint any one thing, what he did was he came up with different discipling inputs that tended to lead to maturity and discipleship. So things like confession and absolution, scripture reading, prayer, certain relationships. And so he wrote a whole book talking about these different things that tend to lead to more mature Christian followers. And then I'm going to tell you his most recent one. And what I loved about his most recent book um, was his most recent book is called The Discipleship Opportunity. And what I loved about this book is he unpacks some stuff that when it comes to disciple making, if you're going to read disciple making books, you'll see a lot of overlapping principles, and it'll tend to repeat itself a lot. But what Daniel did so well in this book, The Discipleship Opportunity, is he has a whole opening chapter where he actually unpacks the church growth movement, which has been around since the
mhm.
1950s. And so what most of us don't realize is all of our institutional memory of church has existed in this ecosystem that we're kind of unaware of. And so there's some assumptions about ministry and about disciple making and about outreach that we make because we're steeped in this ecosystem that has been around since the early 1950s. And so him taking an entire chapter to unpack some of those things that drive your thinking without you realizing it is an incredibly helpful way to start thinking about disciple making in the local church. And so if you were to start with two disciple making books, those two books are really good ones to kind of start you on that journey.
Perfect. I'm going to put that down, those links in there so that people can find out. And of course, I'm going to pick them up myself as well, because I'm
There,
always interested in learning more about or learning how to make disciples. It's interesting as you and I are pastors and we've been doing this for a long time, and yet you get to a certain point where you realize how much you don't know, and you're always learning. You never
it's so
graduate.
true.
You never. I got a piece of paper on the wall that says I graduated, but I really didn't. I really didn't.
You know what's interesting is I was working with a guy who was training a church plant. He was in the midst of seminary, and he was learning to lead some missionary pathway stuff. And as he got done, I was going to have him lead some cohorts. So we were sitting down to connect together. And in our conversation, he looks at me and he goes, I just keep waiting for this to get more complicated. And I'm like, I think sometimes our just even the way we think about ministry, we're like, it can't be this easy. Like it can't be this simple. Like it has to be more complicated. But really, I think that's one of the tricks of disciple making is it is really simple. We just need to find places and spaces to start doing it.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that if you read the Gospels or the Book of Acts and then the epistles, you find out just how Paul. I think in between the lines, you see it. It was simple. Just go,
Yeah.
tell people about Jesus. Go to
Yep.
the next place, tell people about Jesus, and then write a letter back.
It's so true. It's so true. And yet we find ways
Make it.
to complicate it.
Absolutely, we did. And man, oh man, we just got to get out of our own way and let the Holy Spirit take it on. Hey,
Oh,
we're gonna wrap this up real quick, but I do have what I call the billboard question. I'm going to give you the
yeah.
opportunity to reach about several million people all at once, but only for like 10 to 15, 5 to 10 seconds. You got their
Wow.
attention for 5 to 10 seconds. What do you tell them?
I'm gonna say learn discovery Bible study.
Okay.
It's just such a simple method of reading the Bible that works with people. I've done it with groups of pastors that have deep biblical education and experience, and I've done it with people that have barely read the Bible. I did it. I've done it with one guy that he's like, "Hey, I think about getting a Bible. Which one do I get?" Um, and what I love about it, especially in our culture today, that's so polarized, is it's a way of reading the Bible in which you're letting the Bible speak to you through the Holy Spirit. And you're just asking a few simple questions, and people are observing what God's already placed in Scripture. And I think it's just such a simple but such a powerful tool. Yeah, I would definitely learn Discovery Bible Study.
All right. So what's on your immediate horizon? I don't know if we talked about it at the beginning of this or before we started, but you've got a new position. I can see boxes behind you. You look like you're
Yep,
in the midst of a
I
move.
am. I am moving into a new office.
Okay.
So as of this recording, we are on Sunday. We are doing our official baton pass, and I'm becoming the lead pastor of Faith in Oakville. And then also I'm the in that call, I'm also the director of the Kairos Network, which is cool. And so I'm moving offices, and we've got just an incredible team here. So it's really fun to get to work in such a missional church. But yeah, that's definitely a new thing on the horizon.
Excellent. Well, I'm praying that God is going to just use you to explode the St. Louis area, but also around the world to get people involved. I've got a link in this description of the podcast to the Kairos Network. Is that the best way to get a hold of
Yes.
you?
Yeah, the Kairos Network. You can email me, Matt, M-A-T-T, at thekairosnetwork.com. And then also, we've got all kinds of free trainings on there you can check out. And if you want to get plugged into a cohort, there's info for how your church or an individual or a whole district could do it. So,
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for joining me on the podcast today. God's blessings to you, my friend.
well, thank you, Ed. This is so fun, and keep it up because it's always fun to get to connect with you.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. I was so excited to hear Matt tell us about the Missionary Pathway and the Kairos Network and just telling people about Jesus. So much so that I'm going to be looking into joining the cohort that he was talking about with the Missionary Pathway and looking at ways to bring it to my own congregation where I serve as lead pastor. If you'd like to know more about it, there are links in the stream's description, the show notes, whatever you call it for the podcast. Different people call it different things, but I'm going to have links to the Kairos Network, some of the books that Matt talked about. I'm going to have links to those as well, where you can learn more about how to reflect God's light and love. Maybe you don't know anything about God or Jesus. Maybe now you know a little bit more, and you're still wondering, what is it that I could do? What is it that this can make a difference in my life? Well, check it out. Check out the Kairos Network. Check out Matt. Or you can also check out more of the episodes of the Reflection Podcast that we have. We are on all the platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. We also have the podcast is in video form on YouTube, so you can see who I'm talking to in each episode. So check those out, and please rate the program, rate the episode, give it 5 stars if you would. That would be awesome. Share it with other people. Write a comment about it. Give it a review. And we welcome those. That helps us get out to more and more people, because the more people that I can reach with the gospel of Jesus Christ, the better. Because not just because for my own ego, but I want people to know about Jesus, and that's what this podcast is all about. That's what we're all about at St. Matthew Lutheran Church, where I'm lead pastor, and they are the producers of this podcast, as well as others. So check out our website at stmats.net for more information about how you can connect with us and maybe plan a visit if you're in the Hawthorne Woods area, Chicagoland area. We'd love to see you at one of our events or our worship services coming up. That's this episode of the Reflection Podcast. Join me again next time. New episodes in each season will drop on Wednesday mornings, sometime early on in the morning, so you can keep track of that. Subscribe to this, ring the bell, make sure that we have your contact information so we can let you know when each episode drops. We've got some exciting guests coming up this season, so be aware and be ready for the next episode. Thanks for joining me today. I pray that God will richly bless you, and I look forward to seeing you again